Today, we're plunging into a topic that's really reshaped the financial world: environmental, social, and governance ESG investing.
Right, ESG.
Yeah,
It feels like it's everywhere now.
it does. And on the surface, it's always sounded like this elegant solution, a powerful way to tackle huge global challenges, climate change, inequality, even corporate corruption.
The basic promise was clear. Align your money, your capital, with sustainable and ethical principles.
Exactly. But what if, and this is the tricky part, what if ESG investing has, in a way, fooled us all?
Okay. Where are you going with this?
Well, think about that Mark Twain quote. It's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them they've been fooled.
Right, and Feynman added that the easiest person to fool is actually ourselves.
Precisely. So our mission today really is to peel back the layers of this huge, booming industry and ask a tough question. Are the true beneficiaries the environment or society or even the investors trying to do good?
Or someone else.
Or is it, as our source material kind of suggests, a select group of financial intermediaries who profit handsomely from the ESG label?
That's a provocative thought.
It is. It's a paradox, isn't it? An idea built on sustainability that, often seems to have become more of a tool for branding and marketing.
Yeah, that rings a bell. It makes you think of that George Orwell line, maybe twisted a bit, like,
Yeah,
all investments are equal, but some investments are more equal than others.
exactly. So let's talk about the promise versus the reality. What was the stated goal of these ESG ratings initially?
Well, what's fascinating here is how they're positioned. They're designed supposedly to help you, the investor, pick out companies with strong environmental records, good social practices, solid governance.
Right, guides for making responsible choices.
Exactly. Presented as these guides, offering what some have called a window into the soul of corporations. It really does sound like the perfect way to align your portfolio with your values.
And that's the hook, isn't it? People want to do good with their money. But you're hinting the answer to who really benefits isn't quite that simple.
Not as straightforward as we'd like, no. The source points pretty directly toward the financial intermediaries.
Intermediaries. Like who, specifically?
We're talking mainly about the ESG rating agencies themselves, asset managers, and various consulting firms.
Ah,
Think of the big names: MSCI, Sustainalytics, S&P Global. These companies basically capitalize on this huge demand for ESG information
how do they do that?
through things like subscription fees, licensing models, and proprietary methodologies. Essentially, they create and sell the very data that investors are told they need.
Got it. So they're selling the picks and shovels during the ESG gold rush, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it. And the source points out a real irony here.
Which is?
These entities, the ones claiming to promote sustainability, are actually creating an ecosystem where the metrics themselves are often subjective and inconsistent.
Subjective and inconsistent. Okay, that sounds like a pretty big problem if you're trying to make clear choices.
It is. It leads to this phenomenon called aggregate confusion.
Aggregate confusion, meaning?
Meaning, different ESG ratings for the same company often contradict each other. So instead of clarity, investors can end up, well, more confused than they expected.
Huh. So you might get a good score from one agency and a not so good one from another.
Precisely. And here's the really critical insight from the source. This lack of standardized metrics isn't necessarily just an accident, like a byproduct of the industry growing fast.
Wait, not an accident.
The source actually presents it more as a feature of the system.
A feature, not a bug. That's quite a
Right,
statement.
right.
Are they implying it's deliberate to maintain this confusion for profit?
That's the implication, yes. It's designed perhaps to leave room for these intermediaries to operate in the gaps.
How so?
Well, when there's no single universally accepted standard for what good ESG looks like, each firm can develop its own proprietary methodology. Their secret sauce, if you will.
Ah, I see. So they can charge for their unique insights.
Exactly. It allows them to charge premium fees for their unique analysis. And it also creates, a kind of moving target for companies trying to improve their scores and for investors trying to compare apples to apples. It's difficult.
And I guess that lack of a clear, consistent comparison benchmark is what opens the door for things like greenwashing, where maybe companies look good on paper, but aren't actually changing much.
That's exactly right. The focus can easily shift from genuine, impactful, sustainable practices to just ticking the right boxes for disclosure, looking good on the report. Our source material digs into examples where companies get surprisingly high ESG scores, even though they might have, let's say, questionable environmental track records, or ongoing social
And how
controversies.
does that happen?
Sometimes it's simply because they've hired the right consultants or they've become really adept at reporting the data in a favorable light. It can become more about signaling a commitment to ESG than truly implementing deep changes.
Okay, so it's not just the rating agencies profiting from the confusion. What about the big asset managers? You mentioned them earlier, firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. How do they fit into this profit picture?
Oh, they absolutely play a significant role. The source highlights how many of these large asset managers have launched a whole suite of ESG-focused funds.
Right, you see them advertised everywhere.
And these funds often command higher management fees compared to their standard non-ESG counterparts.
Ah, the premium for virtue?
You could call it that.
Yeah.
They're effectively turning what started as perhaps a moral or ethical enterprise
Yeah.
into a very lucrative business line. Investors, driven by that desire to make a positive impact, are often willing to pay that premium.
For what they believe is a more responsible investment.
Exactly. Even if the actual impact, thanks to that aggregate confusion and potential for greenwashing, isn't always clear-cut.
So higher fees for potentially fuzzy impact.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty striking. The source also mentions some interesting psychological angles for investors themselves, things like moral licensing and the value action gap. Could you unpack those a bit?
Yeah, those are fascinating concepts. Moral licensing is this idea that when we do something we perceive as virtuous, like, say, investing in an ESG fund, it can sometimes almost subconsciously give us permission to be less ethical elsewhere.
Huh, like, I've done my good deed with my investment, so it's okay if I...
Right. Take that extra flight or whatever it might be. It's like balancing the scales in our own minds, sometimes in ways that aren't entirely logical.
Okay, I can see how that might happen. And the value action gap.
That refers to the common disconnect between what people say they value, like sustainability, and what they actually do in practice.
So someone might say, I really care about the environment,
But their investment portfolio might still contain companies with pretty poor environmental records. Perhaps because they weren't aware, or the information was confusing, or maybe other factors like returns took priority in the end.
it just highlights how difficult it is to truly align those stated values with complex investment decisions, especially given everything we've just discussed about the ratings and the confusion.
Absolutely. And this all kind of brings us back to the core challenge, the central argument here. Despite its virtuous appearance, ESG investing can sometimes function as an illusion of change.
An illusion.
Yeah. The source uses this analogy of the lion in sheep's clothing. ESG often masquerades as a vehicle for societal good, but the truth, it argues, is less clear-cut.
Because the ratings might be more about signaling than driving real impact.
That's a key part of it. It forces us to ask, what are these ESG ratings and the whole ecosystem around them really achieving, both for investors trying to use them and, more importantly, for the environment and society they claim to help?
Right. So thinking about our listener, what does this all mean for you as you consider where to put your attention, your resources, maybe even your investments?
It's a lot to process.
It is.
Yeah.
We've talked about how this whole ESG space has become significantly commercialized. We've seen hints of greenwashing where appearances might trump substance.
We've definitely touched on the financial motivations, the rating agencies, the consultants, the asset managers, potentially charging higher fees for these ESG funds, turning good intentions into, well, a profitable business.
And we even got into the psychology, how even for well-meaning individuals, things like moral licensing or that value action gap can create a sort of disconnect between wanting to do good and what actually happens.
It's complex. The system isn't necessarily set up for easy, clear-cut, impactful choices.